Dr. Varden. I'm very excited to chat with you today, a fellow health holistic practitioner. But you're so many more things. Can you kind of elaborate on what you do and who you are?
Gosh, that's a loaded question. Actually, I started off as an educator. My first degree was as a teacher, and that is actually in my blood. When you talk about genetics, my mother was a teacher, principal of a school. Actually, she's principal of a school right now at 80 years old, and just going strong. My sister is a teacher, so that really has been something that is just ingrained in me, is to be able to educate people information that they may not know or that's not readily available. Mm-hmm. And that works right into what I am doing now. Other things that I've done, I also am actually a nationally certified paralegal, so understanding some information in the legal world.
Wow.
But that's not where my path was to be. And working into my journey that I talked about during my presentation and the car accident I had really propelled me into wanting to know how to work health and healing. And when I got into the more scientific aspect, getting into the medical science field, to wanting to know how to heal myself and my husband from that car accident, I did work in genomics, genetics, learning about the body, how it worked. And I found it so incredibly fascinating to think, wow, of just these 4 nucleotides making up Mozart, Hitler, going the range, how do they become what they are? I know it's not just genetics, it's also experiences, the nurturing, their life, that gets into the epigenetics. And just that fascination, that's what really propelled me, that we have the power to change that.
Wow. Okay. And I feel like sometimes we can kind of use DNA and genetics interchangeably. Would you mind unpacking that a little? Like what is DNA and what is genetics and what is genomics?
Okay. So DNA, that is the blueprint for all of us, for all things. I mean, all the way down to a tsetse fly and the tree out there. It all is composed of those 4 nucleotides. It's just the order of which they are made and strung together. That beautiful thing that, when laid all out, is actually miles and miles and miles long. And you consider that when it's all wound up in a chromosome and those tiny little histones inside a very tiny cell, that right there is amazing. Okay. But when we start looking at that, when we start unpacking that and start having it expressed, the things that it creates, the proteins that it makes to make a cell go from just a pluripotent cell to a brain cell, to a heart cell, to a fat cell.
That's a gene expression.
That's a gene expression. That is the differentiation of the particular genes, because in every one of all the trillions of cells that we have in our body, all the DNA is the same. It's all the same.
Wow.
It's just what part of the DNA is being expressed.
Okay.
And that expression in an embryonic state, as that cell is splitting and growing, it actually will determine what type of cell it will be. That's called differentiation.
Okay.
And then the tissue that it has. And then that's when certain genes get silenced, because we don't want a brain cell expressing heart cell information or vice versa. Okay? So it's the expression that determines how the phenotype, what we see, blue eyes, blonde hair, tall, short, these typical things, but then also how our bodies work.
Okay.
So you were asking about genetics to genomics. Now,
yes.
The expression of the DNA, the genetics that we have, because we have 23 pairs of chromosomes. okay? 46 in total. We get 23 from mom, 23 from dad. 22 of those are what we call autosomal DNA. That is just, all the information for our bodies. The other 2 are our sex chromosomes, okay? We get, obviously, like I said, 1 from mom, 1 from dad. Whether they are XX, that makes female, or XY, that makes male.
Okay.
So when we're looking at these chromosomes, when they are coming together from the sperm, from the egg, okay, that's when the magic happens. And that's where that expression, once they start splitting, growing, splitting more, start differentiating and making us who we are, it's the expression of the genes that makes the difference. But when we have a DNA test, a genetics test, they are looking at specific sites on the chromosomes that have been studied and shown to have different propensities, like for ApoE gene and looking at Alzheimer's risk, okay? A lot of genetic companies look at the propensity of disease. For example, having someone have an 80% chance of getting Alzheimer's, or having a certain propensity for type 2 diabetes, okay? That is more what genetics looks at, that propensity for any type of variant that the gene has. Okay, so diving a little deeper, what's a variant? A variant is where the nucleotides get switched. So where there should be an adenine, okay, because there's the 4 nucleotides, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. The A might be switched and it might be a C, okay? In which case, that is not the optimal way. It may have that protein work less efficiently, okay? We'll get into that in a little bit. So because a protein or a gene might work less efficiently, that's where problems can arise. For example, like I had mentioned, Alzheimer's, the ApoE gene, this has to do with cholesterol and its usage. Well, they have a lot of cholesterol, a lot of plaque formation, getting into the brain, can cause strokes, can cause issues. You can actually have deposits of these proteins in the brain, which is what Alzheimer's is about. But the fact that 20% of people who have that particular variant don't get the disease, why?
Right.
So this is where functional genomics comes in. This is the difference, because we're not looking at propensity to disease. We do see that, but it's saying, okay, so you may have that propensity. Now let's look at your genes, at your pathways, to say, how can we tweak this? How can we lean in on the strengths of your genes? Look at the weaknesses where there may need to be some support or help, so that way you can be part of that 20% that doesn't get that disease. Because yes, you can do that. You have the power with the knowledge to do that.
Wow.
And that's the difference.
Okay. So just to kind of backtrack, because that was incredible. Your genes are your gene expression is from your parents. So
Well, your genes are from your parents, what you get from your genes.
Okay.
The expression of the genes is from your environment, from the food that you eat, the exposures, the lifestyle. That's what actually affects how your genes are expressed.
And we can turn that on and off.
Correct.
Wow.
I do have to say, though, that there is generational information, generational trauma that can actually affect genetic expression. I don't know if you want to go down that road.
Let's go down that road. Yes, no, because that is something huge that I actually see currently in my practice as well. As as we're unpacking and unpacking and unpacking, unraveling. I do a lot of hair tissue mineral analysis, so I see minerals, and a lot of times people have that calcium shell around their cell, and a lot of times that can be due to trauma and just really heavy stress, past trauma. So you're saying that is.
That can affect that child, and as they grow into adulthood, what happened in utero, of course, that's a genetic expression. When the cells are growing, when that baby is growing, the food from the mother, toxic exposures from the mother, medications that the mother is taking, that affects how that baby is going to grow. That's why it's so important that mothers take care of themselves, get the rest, keep their stress levels down. If they do have any type of toxic exposures, living in a moldy home, or at work where they may be exposed to lots of chemicals, they have to realize that is going to affect their baby.
Yes.
So.
Wow. Do you think that, because I see 20-year-olds who have this really severe past trauma, but it could be at birth, right? Whether you're a cesarean baby or natural birth, whether your mom was on medications and not, depending on what it was. For me, my mom was put on a terbutaline pump for weeks before, so she could expedite the birthing process, and I think that has really affected my gut health and my mineral status to this day, and I'm 29. So is that something that if I'm seeing in these young 20s, they're highly stressed, they're overworked. Of course, it's your lifestyle factors and all that you mentioned, but past trauma, even from birth, is still affecting them to this day?
Absolutely, because this works into that almost a generational trauma, more of the emotional traumas.
Yeah.
For example, I have a friend who is of Jewish descent. Her grandparents were killed in Auschwitz.
Wow.
And the whole family dynamic and system, the way that trauma had carried on and what they had to do to survive. And, having to move and flee from their country, and just that survival, that information actually gets stored in our genes.
Wow.
So this can go beyond just the actual physical traumas of medications and other things, but actually the mental and emotional trauma that can actually be transferred down to the younger generations who were never in Auschwitz, who never, had those types of situations. But there's this genetic familial information history. So what ended up happening is that, obviously there was some major trauma in the family, a lot of mental illnesses and other things that her mother, grandmother, couldn't get over very well. She took it upon herself to heal. And in that healing journey, which included a lot of hypnotherapy, as well as taking care of her own body, meditation, breathing, tapping into that, to this higher self, to spirit, to God. And through her healing, it actually transferred to the healing of her mother and her aunt for the traumas that they had. They didn't do the work, she did the work, but it transferred. Amazing. How exactly that happened? I don't know. And it's kind of one of those things where it's leaving that to that faith, to that energetic healing that is beyond just the physical.
It's beautiful. And I mean, I just from generation to generation, because I think about this, what you just said with my mom as well. And I think that my mom came from a generation where you just move through it. You just plow through it. You just deal with it. You just, go, you just go. And I feel like in my healing journey, running functional lab work, just trying to pursue optimal wellness, we're at a BiohackingCongress, always trying to do better. I took the time to work through past trauma, or just, be able to sit with, a Christian therapist and help me work through my stuff. And that was just so foreign to my mom. She was just like, no, we don't have time to do that. I had to go, I had to do things, I had 4 kids, I had to do this and I had to do this. And it's just like, it pains me a little bit, 'cause she's seeing me work through all this. And then she's, in her 60s, like, wow, like I never did that. And it's just like, wow. So I guess I'm just, grateful for the journey of healing in that mental space, because it's necessary, right? And especially
Absolutely.
for your gene expression. I feel like I'm doing the work now. So when I do have kids one day, like, I'm hoping that, they're not gonna, I guess,
Carry on that generational trauma.
Yes. Yeah. Like breaking generational curses for my family.
Exactly. And the thing is, I mean, there is something to be said about that, just go and keep moving forward, that forward momentum, but that should not discard or not include the fact of spending some time not to bury it. You may have to temporarily until you have the space to then deal with it, because the issues are in the tissues. And if you don't deal with them, they will show up in some pathophysiological way. So this is where you doing that work, you being the example, that now she's realizing, wow, look at the healing that you have done. Maybe that will plant the seed for her to say, you know what, it's never too late. I'm going to start dealing with this now, because that continues to heal back past generationally, so that way it can beneficially affect your child, her grandchild.
Yes. And currently I'm actively trying to, the talk with thyroid dysfunction, so my grandmother had her thyroid removed. My mother is hypothyroid. My little sister has Hashimoto's. I've clinically hypothyroid, but I mean, I've been able to eradicate all my symptoms, and I'm just pretty much in, I guess, remission, you could say, but I'm also doing what I can in prevention to not have that passed down. So is that and you hear this all the time, right? It's just like, oh, well, my grandmother had Alzheimer's. My mother had an autoimmune disease. Like, that means like it's going to get passed down, and I just have to be proactive. Like, that is genetic. Is it?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Again, that goes back to propensity. Yeah, you may be genetically predisposed to get it. Doesn't mean you have to. That is the power, the knowledge of your genetic blueprint, and looking at it through a functional lens, saying, okay, here are my genes, here are my pathways, especially with the detox pathways, okay? Because a lot of it is how good is our body clearing the toxins that are in and around us, because we live in such a toxic world right now.
Yes.
I mean, more so than any other generation. And, water, air, food, everything.
Yeah.
So when we know our genes, where we know where we have challenges, then we know where to support. Where we know we're strong, we're like, okay, we're going to lean in on this and make sure that we don't, mess up this pathway. You start healing the gut, everything else downstream starts fixing itself.
Yes.
And thyroid, that's a gut issue.
It is, yep.
So, and thankfully, there is a way to heal that. But first of all, it's knowing what the problem is. You've got to educate yourself into, okay, what do I have to work with? How can I fix it?
Yeah.
But not just throwing spaghetti at a wall and trying, okay, well, this and that and this and that. Because, that can get expensive and time consuming, and it doesn't guarantee that you're going to get better. The nice thing about having your DNA done and having it be interpreted in a functional way gives you a lot more precision. We can really start narrowing down and saying, oh, okay, you don't have any copies of your GSTM1 gene, which is part of the glutathione conjugation pathway. Glutathione being your master antioxidant molecule of the body. There are 3 major genes that we look at for the glutathione conjugation pathway. Your GST-T1, okay, that deals more with helping to remove toxins from your cardiovascular system, from the bloodstream, major superhighway. GST-M1 deals more with removing toxins from the gut, the biome, the even the lungs, okay. GST-P1 deals more with how sensitive are you to aerosolized particulates, mold toxins, smoke, gasoline, any kind of toxins like that. So we can actually look at that, see where you might have a problem, and then better target how we can support that. And also knowing where we need to mitigate any toxic insults.
Right. So having those genes means that I am able to do those things.
That you're able to clear and help. But with the GST-T1 and GST-M1, those are copy number variants. So you can have 0 copies, 1 copy, or 2 copies.
And everybody's different?
Everybody's
like you won't know
different.
until you test?
Correct.
Interesting.
I actually have both copies of both my GST-T1 and GST-M1. The thing is that you would think, for the GST-M1, remember, for the gut microbiome and for the lungs, that's great. Well, we have found out that actually having both copies is actually a little over-aggressive to the point where it can cause autoimmune issues in the gut. I've dealt with psoriasis on my scalp. That's an autoimmune issue. That's due to the over-aggressive nature in my gut.
So what do you do about that?
What I do is, first of all, I have to be careful about what I take in. I help support my body with liposomal glutathione, with NAC, selenium, the precursors. I am careful about, again, exposure. I lived in a moldy house for many years. I am now out of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
That has made a huge
That's
difference,
tough.
in my body.
Yes.
But it's also eating the right foods, being mindful. Now, granted, I haven't totally cleared it. It's still things that I have to deal with, that I'm still navigating and learning. Different shampoos, water. When I travel and go visit people, I can tell how the water filtration or the water in that area, because it will make my scalp flare up or it will actually get better. And it's just, how much can you control? It's like we do the best we can, but
with what we have. Yeah.
But it's that knowledge helps me to fine tune what I do and what I expose myself to.
Yes. Do you think that being predisposed, so just like I'm predisposed to thyroid dysfunction, that makes my journey, my healing or health journey, a little tougher because I do have to battle against acquiring an autoimmune disease?
Well, it makes it more interesting.
Yes. I like that better.
Yes. Simply because, in a way, it can actually be a bit of a blessing in the way that you are more sensitive to certain things.
Very much.
You probably recognize when you are being exposed to some sort of toxin quicker than other people.
Or gluten.
Exactly. So you know to stay away from that.
Yes.
It's kind of like a canary in a coal mine. Okay, they're the first ones to feel it, so they can remove themselves much earlier. Where people who deal with it and who handle it a little bit better, they stay in that toxic soup, get more exposed, and when they finally realize it, it's a full-blown mess.
Yes.
So there is a silver lining to that, and you're probably more acutely aware when you do make the changes.
Very much. Yeah. No, and you're right. There's so many people that I talk to, and it's just like, why is this so much harder for me than someone else? And, a lot of people don't really take the time to kind of walk through their health history. And that's something that I really try to touch on in a consultation is, well, what was your birth story? Like, do you know how your mom birthed you? Or, what's your medical history? What's your, genetic history for your mom and your dad? And I feel like a lot of times we don't even consider that part of the story, but
it's very much a part of our story. That's
yes,
part of our
that's what made
allostatic load.
Yes. Okay.
All of those situations, all of the experiences, and we're not talking just, physical, we're talking emotional, mental, all of the stresses in our life, that accumulation of it is our allostatic load.
Yeah.
So it all plays a part, absolutely.
And
everything
this
is connected.
A testing that you do in your practice.
Yes, for my practice, yes. For the DNA company, we take a very full, rich, very extensive history. And when we do their DNA, that is like a missing piece. Because yes, we can get all of the history and we can work off of that. But having their DNA and looking at their functional pathways highlights the cues and the focus, those red flags of going, okay, this is why. It validates the condition that person is dealing with.
Right.
And it really helps to be more precise, that more precision medicine and focus on where support needs to be done.
Okay.
So, I mean, like I had said in my talk with that gentleman, the golfer, who had hypercholesterolemia. Couldn't figure out why. I mean, he looked the picture of health if you just looked at him, but just kept having these problems. And it really came down to looking at his genes and realizing his detox pathways were awful. And then going, okay, because you can't detox, what are you doing in your life where you are bringing on a lot more toxic burden? He never thought of golf.
Yeah.
You wouldn't, I'm walking.
The glyphosate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The pesticides, atrazine, paraquat, all of
Yeah.
these, he was exposing himself constantly, thinking he was doing something healthy, doing something that he enjoyed, but it was killing him.
Yeah.
So this is where we never would have known that if we hadn't looked at his genes, if we hadn't seen his pathways and that red flag going, let's take a look at this.
Wow. So when you do test, do the DNA test, there are specific genes that you're testing for.
Yes.
How many?
Actually, we do thousands, but we really focus on about 100 or so because out of the thousands, that we have, tens of thousands, there are only really about 100 or so that deal more with the functional pathways. So again, we're not focusing on the propensity of the disease because it's, a particular gene. Yes, there can be that for diseases, but that's not what gets you there. Remember, there's always that percentage that don't. So that's what we look at. Back it up. We need to look at the root cause. Stop focusing on the branches. How did you get there in the first place?
Okay. So out of the hundreds of genes that you test, this is just so fascinating because I honestly feel like I've never heard of a lot of these genes except the MTHFR.
Yes, we have to dive into that.
That has been such highlighted for whatever reason. I think it just went viral for some reason or something. Or I don't know. I mean, that's maybe how I found it. But like my clients would ask me about it, and I would love for you to touch on that specifically. Okay. Is that something that you can see from the test?
Oh yes,
Okay.
We look at the methylation pathway, and the thing is, pathway. It is not a single gene. Genes do not exist in a vacuum. They work together, just like players on a team. You can't play the game with just one player. It's the whole set. And yes, you may have some weaker players, but you may have some stronger players too that can kind of help balance the overall pathway. But there are still ways to help support those weaker players. So when we're talking about the MTHFR gene, Now, again, that's been the sweetheart gene. That's the latest thing, but that's not where it stops. Because yes, you could have a gene variant where you have that enzyme that is made from the MTHFR where that enzyme does not work as well. So if you have what they call a heterozygous variant, okay, so heterozygous meaning different, so you can have like a C and a T.
Okay.
All right. The CC version of that particular gene is actually the optimal version. So if you have a CT version, that means that you have about 30 to 40% less enzymatic activity for that gene. If you have the TT version, then you have a 70 to 80% less efficiency of that enzyme that's made. I happen to have the TT version. So I actually do not, I have some problems with my methylation pathway. So the thing is, it's like, again, it doesn't stop there because a lot of people go, oh, okay, I have that. I've got to take methylfolate.
Right. Yes.
Well,
That's what they think.
if they start taking that and say a month or two down the road, all of a sudden they're getting anxiety, they're having other issues, migraines, you better take a look because they could be taking the wrong form. This is where we come in because we look at other genes in the pathway. Now, specifically to determine which form of folate they should take, we look at the SHMT1 gene.
Okay.
This gene works with getting methyl groups from the cytosol of the cell into the nucleus. That works into DNA methylation for DNA silencing. We don't want all of our genes to be expressing at once because we have inflammation genes. We have a lot of genes, okay? It is tightly regulated to where certain genes are expressed, certain genes are silenced. So that's what helps that. The thing is, if you have a suboptimal SHMT1 gene and you're taking methylfolate, that's where you can start over-methylating yourself. It's kind of like that door that brings the methyl groups into the nucleus is not working too well.
Yeah.
And it throws the expression and everything else off. So that's where the over-methylation comes in. That's why they may feel good at first, but then start having symptoms of anxiety and headaches and other things. So
Okay.
we need to look at that. So yes, they need folate. What form?
Okay.
If they are suboptimal, they should be taking adenosyl folate. It doesn't come in that, what you'll see as a supplement is folinic acid. So that's the form that they should be taking, not methylfolate.
Okay.
So there's a whole thing. A whole thing when it comes to folic acid. You don't want to be supplementing with folic acid.
Synthetic form, correct?
Correct. And that actually will cause more problems, more harm. Yet that's the form that you usually find in fortified foods and in supplements. Dr. Ben Lynch has done a tremendous amount of research on this since 2011, and he actually has published his work and the research on it that you can actually go to his site. You can actually Google folic acid side effects, Dr. Lynch,
Okay.
and it'll come up. So he actually dives into that, and it's just amazing.
Yikes.
But getting into the methylation pathway a little bit more.
Yes, please.
B12 is another one.
Okay.
Okay, so your B vitamins, very important for the methylation pathway. So a couple of genes that we look at, the MTR gene and MTRR gene. The MTR gene tells us what form of B12 you should be taking,
Wow.
whether you should have adenosyl cobalamin or methylcobalamin. Because again, depending on the version you have, that'll tell you which form, because if you take, say, you're suboptimal, but you're taking a methylcobalamin, again, you could over-methylate yourself. You're not utilizing those methyl groups very well. So that can be a problem. So again, looking at the genes, the form is important. And then
Yes.
there's also another gene we look at, the FUT2, FUT2 gene, which is in the gut. Because B12 cannot transport in the gut to get into the bloodstream by itself. You need to have that carrier, and the FUT2 gene is actually that transporter of B12 from the gut to the bloodstream.
Okay.
If that is suboptimal, you're not going to be absorbing B12 very well through the gut. So if you're taking like a pill form, you're not going to get the benefits. So that's where you'll need sublingual.
Okay.
So you have that more immediate
Delivery.
absorption.
Yeah.
I mean, our mothers say, chew your food, chew slowly. Part of that, mechanically breaking down for digestion, but also allowing some of those vitamins and nutrients to be absorbed in the oral cavity to end up being used for the brain and in the system much more readily.
Wow. Okay. So having the MTHFR gene is a good thing.
Oh, well, we all have it. It's just whether it is working optimally or suboptimally.
Okay. And if it's, so when it's working suboptimally, what was it? Is it just lifestyle that affects that?
The expression. So again, this is where, first of all, knowing if you are suboptimal, and then what do? I always lean into food first. Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. So you need to support your body with the B vitamins. I like getting this through like beef liver.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Bee pollen, other bee-rich foods.
Okay.
I mean, God has given us everything that we need. The only thing is that we've kind of toxified.
Yes.
So we have to be conscientious of our sources, organic foods, grass-fed and finished beef, different types of sources. The animal sources are wonderful, especially when it comes to organ meats, okay, getting those B vitamins. So nutritional yeast, different things like that. Give us those B vitamins. So that also leafy greens are wonderful to help support the methylation pathway. And COMT gene, I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No.
That's the tail end for the methylation pathway because it puts that methyl group onto the substrate, whether it be a neurotransmitter or a toxin, and sets it up for clearance. Because remember, methylation is a phase 2 detoxification pathway, happens mainly in the liver. Okay, so gotta love the liver.
Yes, oh, it's huge.
Support that liver.
Yes,
this is where I love
for everything.
Castor oil packs. Wonderful.
Oh, yes.
So between things that you can do to support, you want to support those detoxification pathways, and those things that I was saying help to do that. Also, making sure you are supporting lymphatic flow. You don't want to be detoxing if your lymph is stagnant.
Yeah.
Start from the bottom up. You want to make sure you're pooping.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that your lymph is flowing and you are draining. Then work on detox. But your detox pathways still need to be supported. So it's all of these things having to work together in a beautiful concert to make sure your body is working efficiently.
Okay. So then after we test and we make those changes and those modifications, you're able to retest and see how you did.
Well,
Or no.
okay. Now here's the thing. When you're talking about DNA testing, because your DNA does not change, that's like a one and done.
Right.
So if you do it again, you're going to get the same results because it's your DNA. What you want to test to see about the changes, you want to test something that shows the epigenetic changes. This is where your blood work comes in. This is where our DNA aging, looking at your biological aging, DNA methylation, the epigenetic clock based on Dr. Horvath's research, the Horvath clock, okay? Looking at those measurements of your epigenetics, of your current state, the expression of your genes, that's where you will start seeing a difference, not in your genetics themselves. That just gives us the blueprint, the information to work off of, but then we have all the other tests to actually see your progress.
Okay. So this is a really great test to do alongside your blood work or GI map or HTMA.
Correct.
Okay. Wow. That's incredible.
So much information.
It is, but it's really good. It's just it's very sciencey, and you do a very good job at articulating it. So thank you. I kind of want to switch gears a little bit and talk about what you had mentioned it earlier. We have a couple more minutes, but I want to talk about nutrigenomics.
Okay, yes.
And you said, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And
yes.
I see the and I know it's nutrition,
That's
so
right.
please dive into that.
Yes. Okay. There's actually two terms that are sometimes used interchangeably: nutrigenetics and nutrigenomics.
Different.
They are different, but they are actually like two sides of the same coin. Nutrigenetics actually deals with how your genes absorb, utilize the nutrients that are coming in. Okay, how is it working with that? For example, the BCMO1 gene, beta carotene monooxygenase gene, which deals specifically with vitamin A. Do you convert beta carotene to retinol, the usable form that we can actually utilize for vitamin A? How well do you use that? Okay, so if someone has a gene variant, they don't convert it very well. Well, eating a bunch of carrots is not going to help so much. They really need it in the form that is already in a retinol or retinol palmitate form, something that their body can actually use. So this is where I usually recommend like cod liver oil. Okay, all right, so that's how your genes work with the nutrients coming in.
Okay.
Then nutrigenomics takes those same nutrients and looks at it, how does it impact the expression of the genes?
Wow. Okay.
So, because when you have vitamin A, there are certain genes that get turned on, helps with the eyes, eye health. How does that affect the expression of the genes that the vitamin A receptors that it's working on for that cell?
Okay.
So, you see how that works? It's like two sides of the same coin.
So food really is medicine to our body. It's literally information to give us to function.
Yes.
Yeah. That is really awesome. Let me see. I think we answered all my questions. Which I want to thank you so much for being here and being so knowledgeable. You seem like you're very passionate about your work, and I love that, and you're very knowledgeable. So
thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I so appreciate being here and meeting you, and I would love to talk more.
I would love to talk more. Seriously. I'm like learning so much. It's almost like just taking it all in.
Yeah. Well, you know, a mentor of mine has always said, a rising tide raises all ships. There is so much need for this information, to educate people, to empower them, so that way they can evolve to the best versions of themselves. And there needs to be more of us. And there's so much to know.
There is.
It's like we can't know everything.
No,
Trust me, I'm trying.
Yeah, and you're doing a great job.
But when we work together, you know, when we put our heads together and with new ideas and coming to conferences like this is where we can expand our knowledge, expand our networking to help more people to get the word out. And that's really where it needs to be. It needs to start with the education.
Yes, and I can see your educational background in the way that you present yourself and the way that you speak. It's very clear, and I appreciate that about you. And I, even with me and my clients, you know, I think that education is key in compliance, right? You know, the more that they know and understand, the more that they are to be compliant with, you know, the protocol, or, you know, whether it's supplements or diet or lifestyle or anything in that realm. So, definitely love this conversation, and I can't wait to talk to you more. But thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And for all of your listeners, you can actually visit us at thednacompany.com. We also have our Instagram, at the DNA Co. Mine is at Dr. Varden Official. We also have our YouTube channel. You can find and subscribe to the DNA Company as well as the DNA Talks podcast. So there's lots of amazing information there to help educate people.
Yes, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.